Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate vision into frontline operations. Today, my guest is Gena Cox. Thank you very much for being on the show, Gena.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. It's amazing to figure out that I get the chance to talk to somebody about the things that I absolutely love, and they're just going to let me do it.
That's what it is. And you get a soapbox, you stand on it. Well, not literally, figuratively. And we want you to stay in the camera. That's the feedback that we've been getting. A lot of people like the fact that, my gift to you is to not be a constraint, but a conduit to your message and to all of our guests.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Speaking of all of our guests, go to What CEOs, the people listening or watching, you want to have all the CEO tools. You want to have access to leading with inclusion or leading with inclusion, Gena?
Leading inclusion.
Leading inclusion. Thank you very much. You want to have access to all of the books, all the authors that come on to show. You want to have access to the services that they offer. Go to tools, books, insights, tabs on the What CEOs Talk About. We've got SaaSes in there that we refer to clients all the time, Monday.com, Bamboo HR. I mean, you name it, just to name a few of the tools. So go out there, click on the link, and it'll get you access to those tools, the books, and the services that these guests offer throughout the world. Thank you very much. Gena, what is the title of the show?
Let's go with Inclusion Tops Diversity.
Damn, that's good. There's always a colorful joker and a black and white joker. The colorful joker always wins. Always wins. Always wins. Always wins. Gena, thank you very much. We'll get to that. Can you tell us, for the benefit of the audience and the people watching, can you tell us your story? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? It puts context around the person speaking so that the listeners can get what you're all about.
Oh, I'd be happy to. So, I said earlier before we started the recording, I said to Martin, sometimes people say I have a goofy little accent. They don't hear it right away, but over time, they hear it. And so I think there's a great advantage for me to tell people right up front, okay, if you hear a funny accent, don't worry, don't panic, everything is okay. The reason for that is that I was born in England, and I had this experience where my parents were part of that generation. Some people call it the Windrush generation, but that is just a shorthand because there was a ship that sailed from Jamaica to England in the 1950s, taking Jamaicans to to the city of London to help the city rebuild after the World War. But people were coming to the city from all the colonies, not just from Jamaica. And my parents came from Barbados, and they met there in the 1950s. I was born there a bit later than that. And but then I had the opportunity to go back to the Caribbean. So I spent most of my formative years in Barbados, and I've lived in the United States now for a long time. But I still think of myself primarily as an island girl. And what that means is that I have this sense that, don't take yourself so seriously. Like, there are lots of big problems in the world. We're going to worry about them, but let's allocate the time for that. But let's just make sure we leave some time to sort of enjoy ourselves and go to the beach, figuratively.
I love how you say island. It's not island, it's island.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. Love it.
I didn't even hear it.
I spend a lot of time in the Caribbean as well. So tell us your journey. So work-wise, how did you wind up to becoming an author of Leading Inclusion? Sorry, I will get the title right. Damn it. Sorry.
Yeah, leading inclusion. Well, I'm an organizational psychologist, so I spent decades advising leaders in corporations about how to build healthy organizational cultures and places where people really want to work and thrive and get the work done and all of that. And at the same time, of course, for some of that time, I was an employee of big companies. And To be truthful, I call myself a fake, a fraud, and a phony. Those are three descriptors that I copied from one of our national politicians who I will not name. But when I first heard it, I thought that is so evocative. I'm going to keep using it. But I'm calling myself a fake, a fraud, and a phony because over those years that I was advising leaders, I often couldn't tell them everything I wanted them to know. There was no path for me to do that. Not only that, there were times when I was myself not having a great experience in the organizations where I was working, but I'm here I am telling leaders what they should do to create great organizations. So after, I did that for many years. And then in the spring of 2020, my whole life changed. I'll be very honest with you that when Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd were killed, I was changed. And so you might think of that as melodrama. She's over the top, blah, blah, blah.
No.
The truth is that I was shaken to the core. But beyond these big social things, there was a personal revelation where I said, all these years that you've been faking it, maybe is there any time better than this for you to just really be yourself and help to solve this problem that could be solved? And I said, you know what? I'll take all my years of training, all my experience, everything I know, and I'll channel it into a book that I intend to be part of the solution to this challenge that we have, where we're passing each other in the streets and we're not connecting. We're just missing, and therefore we never get to solve any problems.
It's beautiful that you say that. We had an episode, I think it was last year, intentional solutions for intentional problems. And it was a story of my guest who being a Black man into the financial world, and how it's not about how do I say this? It's not accepting, I think, is the fact. And I think that even a small triggered event, and I don't think that George Floyd and all the other people is a small event. There are events that trigger emotions within people saying enough is enough. And without burning the world and grabbing pitchforks, there's opportunities to be what Gena is saying is, how do I become intentional about my actions to solve problems without pointing the finger? You took ownership of a lot of things. And I love that. I think more people, I'll tell you about my story, but yes, continue, please.
Well, that really is it, in the sense that, if you have a certain insight, like I have had that insight for decades, the insights I share in this book, to be honest, are mostly not new to me. There are things I've understood, but haven't previously necessarily shared in this cohesive fashion because, like I said, I didn't think there was a path, a way to do that. When you're advising senior leaders, you make decisions about what is going to be necessary to make sure that they hear the most important things that they need to know about. And so when leaders consistently say that, when you can tell that leaders are consistently focusing on or thinking about the human experience as sort of secondary to other aspects of the operation of a business, over time, there's sort of a pattern that gets established in the information that gets to the C-suite in particular. And so what changed for me was that I said, you know what if you just had this opportunity to say exactly what you know from your training, your experiences, your unique insights that maybe no one else can offer in the way you offer them? Wouldn't it be a shame if you never did that? And so that was the approach that I took. So leading inclusion is really intended for leaders of organizations that operate primarily in the United States context, social context. And people who aspire to lead organizations like that, so they could be students in MBA programs or wherever as well, to let them know that when we talk about the challenges that exist in organizational life with regard to what some people call diversity and inclusion, a terminology that I don't love, for them to understand that there's something that they can do to make things better.
So tell me, what was the trigger event? So how long? Because I'm on my journey of writing my book, and it took me years of getting pushed. And I'm actually wearing the T-shirt "Embrace the Ox." It took me years to kind of get to a point where I've committed. And AJ Harper, who was a guest of mine, I have dyslexia, and or I should say, I don't have dyslexia. I am dyslexic. Pardon me.
Mhm.
And she said she called bullshit on it. She's like, no, there's a process, just like business process for writing a book. But there has to be a trigger event. That was my trigger event to start writing my book. What was yours? Like when you were thinking about what do I do? How can I help? Did the book came straight to mind, or did you have different thoughts? Like how did you come up to say, I'm going to write a book?
I think the book was, I'd always desired to be an author in a very abstract kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And so writing a book or writing was something that seemed like the best path for me to get my ideas out. It always been, as opposed to some other avenues that I could have chosen. But the other thing was that I recognized that the people that I want most to hear my message will sometimes need to hear that message privately. Because the very nature of this conversation, the part of the reasons why we're like ships passing in the night, is that the topic is somewhat taboo in corporate life. And I can talk one-on-one with an executive and we can have very profound conversations. But beyond those one-on-one conversations, there's still a certain degree of timidity, caution about the subject matter. So I thought, if I write a book, maybe this will be the easiest way for me to get it into the hands of as many people as possible. They can process it on their own time, hopefully, and it will still be beneficial. But preceding that, because I think what you're really asking me was, when did the emotion get to the point where you were compelled to do something?
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
I think that's what you're really asking. And so
Yes.
it got to the point, as I said before, the spring of 2020. I mean, we were all already suffering with all the stuff with COVID, lots of uncertainty. I think all of us were already at a certain level of emotional, anxiety anyhow. But those horrible killings occurred. And Breonna Taylor, it thought she could be my daughter. She doesn't look exactly like my daughter, but I thought, she could be my daughter. And if that were true, what would I do? Would I just say, okay, and then go to bed and wake up tomorrow morning and make breakfast? I could not. So it was really the personal, the feeling of being part of this, of this whole situation. That I was in it. I felt like I was in it, and therefore I needed to be part of the solution. And so the book was the easiest thing for me to do. Might not be the easiest thing for someone else to do. But to be honest with you, you mentioned AJ Harper. And AJ Harper is part of the reason that I got my book completed.
Oh, no way.
Did you know that?
I did not. Not.
So, but in a more abstract way, because I didn't know her, the whole idea of, I found myself around some people who were creators. They were creating a variety of things. They were writing articles, they were writing books, they were writing speeches, I found myself in a community of people who had things that they wanted to say to help transform the world. And all of a sudden, I was in a place where a desire to transform the world was understood, and people believed that you could do it with a book. So that actually helped me to make this happen.
It's I want to come back to the trigger point, because a lot of people, the judgy people out there, go, well, it wasn't your daughter, it wasn't this, wasn't that, what do you care? And I always come back, what's your favorite food? And they'll say, I don't know, spaghetti. I say, I hate spaghetti. Are you going to judge me because I hate spaghetti? Right. And then somebody goes, why do you hate spaghetti? Oh, you see, there's the emotion. Yeah. You were just emotional about spaghetti.
Yes.
So I trick the people. I do behavioral based leadership also converts into, like my wife says, you're manipulating people, maybe a little for their benefit. Anyways. And I say, you got emotionally attached to spaghetti. So imagine if somebody feels attached. What sport do you like? I thrive rugby. I've played rugby all my life. My kids love rugby, not because I pushed them in, because my wife kind of gently nudged them, says, hey, listen, if you want to. My kids love rugby. Why do I love rugby? Because it represents something for me and my family. And you can't judge somebody for liking or disliking somebody if they're not hurting somebody in the process. Mm-hmm. So seeing Mr. Floyd pass in the way that he passed, regardless of color, regardless of age, sex, religion, if you felt emotionally attached to that situation and you needed to feel to do something about it, then you had the right to do so. Sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox.
No, but you're absolutely right about it. It did take something. It did take that level of emotion about something, this particular issue, for me to eventually take the action that I took in the form of
Yeah.
writing a book. It did take that, because up until then, frankly, I mean, this wasn't necessarily something new. I mean, certainly the cruelty of this particular situation was new, but there had been similar situations, and I had continued on and had my breakfast. So, you know, I don't think it's something that a person can predict, of course, because the day before, had you asked me, was I going to write a book about this? The answer would have been, what are you talking about?
No.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us about the title. Why the title?
The title
Can you
of
give
the
us the
show,
title again and then give us a narrative behind it, please?
Yeah, the title of the show, or the title of the book.
The title of this show, this episode.
Yeah. So the title of this episode, Martin, is Inclusion Tops Diversity. And
why is that?
That is a topic, a title that I have to tell you, another very clever person helped me to craft, as I have been trying to convey exactly what it is that I'm trying to get people to understand. And the main thing that I'm trying to get people to understand with my writing, with my coaching, with everything that I do, is that we've got a challenge in organizational life, because my focus is in the workplace, although this is also true outside of the workplace. But we have a challenge in organizational life where a significant portion of the employee population does not have a positive experience on a day-to-day basis when they show up to do the job, wherever they're doing that job. That's just a fact. And how do I know that's a fact? Because I spent years and years measuring employee opinions as a consultant to big companies, where I would see these data and I would see the patterns in those data. So we've got employees having this experience. And guess what? The leaders of the organizations don't know that they're having those experiences. So when you have an event like what happened in the spring of 2020, where the conversation about race and diversity and inclusion, as it's called, came to the forefront, what I noticed was that there was increased and more attention being given to the issue by leaders. But the other thing I noticed two problems. I noticed that all of a sudden there was this magical idea called implicit bias training that everybody was talking about. I don't know who created the marketing that made this happen, but all of a sudden leaders were saying to me, we need some implicit bias training. I'm like, you do? Why? Why do you need that? Yeah. Because the problem with the implicit bias training is that it's not going to solve the real problem that they really have, except that it's something that people can package up and sell, so people were buying it. So 2 years later, I'm convinced that implicit bias training, used as a solution to the problem that I was talking about, that we really started to discuss in the spring of 2020, was never going to work. And 2 years later, it hasn't provided any substantive outcomes where leaders can say, oh, look, I did this and here's what happened. So that was one problem relating to the topic, which I will get back to. And the second thing was, the other thing that I saw leaders do was they all of a sudden started talking about, we need to hire more people of color, more people who are LGBTQ plus, more people who have disability, whatever. So here's the weird thing about that. I mean, of course I agree. You should hire from your available labor force, and it should be representative to the extent that you have whatever the variations are in that workforce. You can't be artificial about it, but at least that, right? But that has always been true. The issue is when you go and try to find people in these different groups and you bring them into your organization, and your organization is still not willing to accept them, to communicate with them, promote them, pay them fairly, put them in the client-facing roles, put them in the revenue-generating roles, put them in the roles that create the product innovations because you don't think they can do it. You haven't solved anything. So inclusion tops diversity, because I really want leaders to focus on what is the experience that people have when they show up in these companies, and why do they have it, and how can we make those experiences great?
We get this all the time, right? So we roll up companies. So companies that are not struggling, they're well established, but they can't sell their business, and they can't sell their business. There's not a market for it. So we roll them up, build a collective. And so therefore we align a lot of the cultures assigned to that. And it amazes me how people think that training will create culture.
Yes.
It is beyond me that they think that if you put a Band-Aid and say, oh, let's put DI, diversity, equality, inclusion training, and that's going to solve all my problems.
Right.
I always say to them, And they go, I got an open door policy. Okay, great. How many people have crossed your door to say, well, we've got, a diversity or, an equality issue? Well, I don't know. I've never. Okay. So let me turn the question around. When have you gone down to the shop floor and said, hey, who's having issues? Tell me, be honest.
That's right.
And why are we having issues? So to all the CEOs that are listening out there, don't be a passive leader. Be an active leader. Be a kind leader. Care about your operations. Go out there, shake hands, kiss babies, do whatever it takes, get your hands dirty to talk to people and stop thinking that the latest and greatest training is going to make your culture better. You lead the culture. They follow your lead. So if you go on the shop floor, guess what? The managers, the vice presidents, the regional managers are going to say, what's the CEO doing on the shop floor? I got to go there too. Ha ha. There you go. So I am a firm believer. Can I tell you my story?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear it.
I struggled as a middle-aged white dude. I struggled when it first came out to the word privileged. I'm like, I'm Scottish. I grew up poor. Take away the R. I would tell everybody I grew up so poor I couldn't afford the R at the end of poor. That's how I grew up. Yeah. So don't tell me that I was gifted everything because I worked my ass off to be where I was dyslexic. I grew up in a poor neighborhood. I fought every single day. So don't give me this bullshit. And then this young lady, Katrina, who was on the show, she says, Martin, has nothing to do with the effort you've put. I said, okay. Says, imagine there's 3 doors in front of you. As a white middle-aged man, you walk up to those doors and those 3 doors will open. Regardless of the effort that you've put in the back, those 3 doors will open for you. If you're a black man, only 2 will open up. If you're a black woman, only 1 will open up. And if you're part of the gay community, and no doors will open up to you. Do you understand? That was such an awakening for me that it had nothing to do with how much I cared about it, how much I was not racist, how much I was inclusive. It was all about because other people, it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with everybody else.
Yeah.
And that was the greatest awakening for me in kind of diversity, equality, and inclusion. And inclusion should be first. Because anyways, I got my opinions, but I'll let you talk.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about what you were saying. And and even the word privilege, it isn't really a word that I personally use, although I think it can have some value in the way that you describe it. Because everybody, I have privilege. The privilege that I have relative to other people who look like me is that, I have a certain level of education. I speak a certain way. And the strange thing about the country in which I live is that people love accents. So once I open my mouth to speak, people are very interested in what I have to say, or might be interested in what I have to say. But I definitely have we all have some privileges, but the issue within our society and within the workplace is that what we're really talking about, it's not so much about Gena and Martin and whether you and I can get along, although that's obviously part of it. It's really about sort of all of these systemic, things like you're describing, things that nobody even thinks about. That, like, if I say to people, how come it is within an organization that within the sales organization of that company, you have absolutely no people of color who are in the roles where they go out to the market to talk directly to the client? Why is that? Is it that there's no one else who could do the job? When they think about it and when they look at the data, here's what they typically find. They typically find that they've recruited everybody from the same school. They got some people there last year and they went back the year after and so on. Everybody was hired by referral. Who do you know? The other thing that often happens is that sometimes, people will say, I don't think the client is willing to deal with people who don't look like them. And that's a real thing that happens.
Really?
It does.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, that absolutely happens. I once had a situation, Martin, that was so bizarre where I was working with a client. I actually won't even mention what country. And so working with this client, and when it got to the point where we would do what we would call our executive presentations, where we talk directly to the C-suite about all of the analyses and things that we've been working on, I think all of a sudden the people I was working with were kind of apprehensive about bringing me to the C-suite to deliver this executive presentation.
Oh my
And
goodness.
what happened is they went behind, within the organization, they went and talked to someone else and said, we need to have a different person do this. And actually, my boss is the one that went and did it. Now, that's a silly little story in a way, but the point of that story, and the reason I'm mentioning it to you now, is that this is something that sounds so bizarre. Like you would say, nobody does that. And nobody does that in this century.
Oh, yes,
You're like, who would do something like that? But the reason my manager behaved that way, my leader behaved that way, was because he was not confident and did not have the courage to say, no, this is the best person. We have to do this. It should have been a no-brainer. So, that's another story. But my point is that there are things that happen every day of that sort. But I'm not necessarily as interested in the little one-to-one changes that we can make. I'm really interested in making sure that leaders of organizations really stop and think about, as you say, what is the culture that they are creating for their organizations that would make it such that the leader of that sales organization would think it would be okay not to change those norms and do something different. As an example.
Thank you. Why inclusivity before diversity? I think I know the answer, but I'd like for you to say your version to our audience.
Well, I have often been the only person who looked like me in a work situation. And yet I have had very positive experiences in some places, and I've had very negative experiences in some places. The differentiator wasn't that I changed in those situations. The differentiator was that these organizations had different cultures and had people in the organization that said, this is how we treat all of our employees, or this is what we value, and so on. Those things were clearly established in the organization. Therefore, an organization can not be particularly diverse and still have that feeling of inclusion for a person or people who show up who look in some way different than whatever the typical person is in that particular place. There's that very simple fact. But the other thing is that no matter then, if you spend all your time and energy on hiring more people in these groups that you think are the target group that, where you want more representation or whatever, as I have said before, you will find that you'll have a revolving door of people who will join the organization, but they will not stay in the organization if you have not taken care of making sure that there are an environment where all people want to do is just come in, do the job to the best of their ability, and not have artificial barriers, not have people sort of ignoring them, at lunchtime in the hallways, and not having bosses who don't seek to put them forward for the opportunities that they think that they should be able to fulfill. The two things go together. But I actually use an acronym, and my acronym is READI. It's REDI. And frankly, all of these acronyms don't really matter. The acronym doesn't matter that much. But the reason that I chose to use the REDI acronym is because the R stands for respect. And I say the most important thing that people can tell you in a matter of minutes whether they feel respected in a situation. Agreed. Right? Anybody. I don't care what color they are, what country they're from, what planet they're from. So I don't think we need to complicate matters. For example, the use of the term belonging, although it's people like to use that term, I don't like to use that term because, first of all, I've never heard a clear definition of it. And the other reason is that I think that belonging is sort of really something that you're basically saying the person who you're hoping to benefit, Gena, let's say, Gena needs to feel a sense of belonging. Well, I'm not going to feel a sense of belonging unless there's that certain environment. Instead, what I really want is for the organization to provide an environment where I feel comfortable. So if you can just do the bare minimum, I believe that respect is the thing that we can tell you if we're feeling it or if we're not feeling it. You can ask me you can do an assessment with one question. Do you feel respected? I can answer it and tell you why I don't and why I do. So it's that the feeling as to whether you are walking into this place every day and there is either something supporting you and you feel like this is where you belong, or you feel as if you're being treated as if you shouldn't belong, you're being disrespected. I think that's really one of the big differentiators.
I always push with a sense of safety.
Mm-hmm.
Do your people within your organization feel physically, emotionally, and mentally safe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they go, what? Yeah,
Yeah.
safety, physical safety has been number one. Talk about mental health, physical health, emotional health.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do I do that? It's simple. Every human being needs three things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see me? Do you hear me? Do I matter?
That's right.
And so, do you see me means do you acknowledge me as a human being within the organization? So, if I see you, and then I will treat you. And if I have a mindset of safety, I see you, I know who you are. Do you hear me? If I have something to say, will you actively listen or will you brush me off?
Mm-hmm.
Number three is, do I matter? Do you go around and asking for people's opinions and implementing situations where things are better or need improvement? Or for me, that's not diversity. It's not saying you got more Martins or more Genas or more Tonys. It means that whoever you bring on, regardless of what they are, they feel safe. And it is
Mm-hmm.
your job as a leader to protect them.
Yes.
How does it go? It says you are, oh shit, I forget. Oh man, you're accountable for their accountability. Anyways, I'll find it, but basically you're responsible for duty of care. And that is you should be able to pass the dinner table test when you're sitting with your family and people ask you, say, Dad, I've got a friend, whatever. When your kids ask you how your day was, you have to be able to pass the dinner table.
That's right.
Will you be the role model and center of influence that you need to be at home, at work? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You're hitting a button, Gena. I love
Well,
this.
that's good. That's good because in my book, I use two pieces of terminology that relate to exactly what you're talking about. The first is be a designated hitter. And in the United States
Ooh,
and in North America, people know what that means. And I'll come back to
yeah.
that in a second. And I say 100% leadership because you don't need new skills in order to manage a diverse, workforce. You don't need new
Mm-hmm.
skills. You need to be an effective leader of the 100%. In other words, whatever skills that you were using that made this group of people feel like they were getting all of this respect and support and equity and whatever they were getting, you just need to
Mm-hmm.
spread it around a little bit more fairly. That's the first thing. I don't think you need a whole bunch of new skills. The second
Mm-hmm.
thing is it's the designated hitter. There's only one person in a 500,000 employee company or a 5-person employee company. There's only one person that is supposed to be the one person who has my back, my immediate
Oh yeah.
manager. You need to be my designated hitter. If you can't have my
Mm-hmm.
back, I know it right away. And if you can't have my back, I can't have all the riches of this organization. So what we have is a situation right now in business where employees say that 80% of the people that leave them are not effective at their jobs. So regardless of race or anything else, that's just a reality. We don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have a lot of effective leaders. Part of it is that not all leaders know what good leadership is. That none of
Agreed.
our organizations are training or managers and leaders to be effective, and we certainly aren't necessarily training them to believe that this whole diversity and inclusion thing is BS, which is what I believe. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
believe because I think it's just a subset of leadership. You either are an effective leader of the 100%, or you are not. So it's as simple as that, in my opinion. And all the diversity and inclusion stuff. I'm not saying the training isn't useful. I'm not saying there aren't things that are beneficial, but I think we have to frame them within the context of leadership.
It's so critical. Behavioral based leadership is something that I push when, like I said, when we do the roll ups, we implement programs and competency development within each of
Mm-hmm.
the organizations. And we give them the tools before the vision and say, hey, here's a tool. Here's a tool. Here's a tool. And what do I use that for? You'll see.
Yeah.
You'll see when the situation happens, you'll see. And it's funny because we had an event and, a guy never spoke behind an older gentleman, a hard worker, never said anything. And we were having a discussion on conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, we're talking and everybody, and we're kind of letting the play go along. And supervisors are struggling with this, and the person is being, acting in a very specific way that is being very difficult. So this older gentleman comes up, walks down, moves everybody aside, and just said, "Why are you so mad?" And just let him vent. And just the demonstration of you don't have to be a supervisor, a manager, a leader of leaders, or an executive. All you have to do is have the right attitude and mental fortitude to say, I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of this. Let's be courageous. Let's have a conversation and say, hey, you matter to me. I see you. Let me hear you. What do you got to say? Mm-hmm. And he just brought it right down. And everybody at the end was like, George, what the hell was that? Like, you've never say anything. He's like, I was tired of all your bullshit. You couldn't solve the problem. It was so funny.
One of my favorite books that came out, I think it came out in 2021, was written by a retired general named, he was one of the co-authors, Tom Colditz. And the book is called Leadership Reckoning. And the reason I love this book is because he says, we have a tradition in North America where everybody goes off to these fancy MBA programs and they get lots of wonderful training and we value certain schools and we do all of this stuff. But we're graduating people who know about leadership, but we're not necessarily graduating people who are leaders of people. Simple idea, right? And obviously somebody coming from the military understands that, yes, there are very many different facets to leadership, but at this core idea that the designated here, that there's only one thing that you must do 100% of the time. And that is see me, hear me, let me know that you see me and that you value me. Like that simple idea that you're talking about, I don't know where it gets lost in the equation. Agreed. Because the reason we even have conversations about things like diversity and inclusion over there in a box is because we're missing the point that we're just talking about the human experience. That's all we're talking about. And if you don't see me when I show up for work, that's why I think I'm not respected. And that's why I am leaving. There's nothing more profound than that. That's it.
I will give you I just thought about it. I will give you a true example to all the audience, people listening here watching this. This is true story. Okay. I'm in Africa. I'm in a gold mine, in, Senegal on the border of Mali. And, I've never seen day in, day out Muslim practice. So I've been around the world. I know about it, but I've never experienced it where the imam and the Friday prayers and all. And so it was in open air. So one day I just walked on the other side because it was happening and said, hey, listen, I really want to see this. I told myself. So I went and I sat on the side, kind of not hiding, but I didn't want to interrupt, right? I didn't want to be a nuisance to it. So I was just kind of watching. And so they start the prayer. And then all of a sudden the imam, who was one of the person that worked for me, got up, stopped the prayers, came to me. And I was like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Like I shouldn't have been here. And he said, Mr. Martin, why are you here? He said, I don't understand it. I want to learn it. And I'd love to learn more. And so he said, come sit with me, sit over there. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to wash your feet, wash your hands, wash your mouth, clean yourself. Just sit here. You don't have to do anything. Just watch. At the end, they just, wow, Mr. Martin, you were here. The next day, the next week, I think it was the next week. The next day, everybody was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the next week at the meeting, the general manager of the plant goes, why is everybody doing so much work for you, Martin? Like, why are you being able to influence other people of other departments within the construction of this mine site in the way? I don't know. I just care about what they do, who they are. And so productivity, every time that I ask something as a leader, they bent over. They say, oh yeah, no problem, Mr. Martin. No problem, Mr. Martin. I'll do it for you. I said, no. Do it when you've got time. But to your point, I showed them the R. I showed them that I respected them as human beings. Mm-hmm. Now the conversation said, no, now, Mr. Martin, you need a second wife. Well, I said, you guys got to go tell Mrs. Tracy, because in twos, the second person has to come back, because the first person who's going to say that to Mrs. Tracy is going to die. So she's going to kill that person. Right. But all to say that respect is I mean, there's a clear demonstration, a business productivity improvement from putting people first. And that's what I tell all the investors that we deal with. You will get a bigger return on your investment by focusing on people first.
Absolutely.
I've got data to prove it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what does the E stand for, Gena?
Well, it's just the rest are the same: the equity, diversity, and inclusion. But but here's the thing. Frankly, the acronym doesn't matter. I have an acronym to help me communicate a point. And people are accustomed to talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, so it's convenient to keep them, because my dream is that, at some period in time, I don't know if it's 10 years from now, 5, I don't know when, we don't even have to have this conversation. Mm-hmm. That would be my goal. But we're not there yet. So, it's just to have a communication device where I can talk about this whole respect thing again and remind everybody that it's really respect first. And it's not that hard to figure out if it's present or absent. And you don't need to hire sophisticated consultants to let you know that. What you do need to do is what Martin suggested, which is you really need to be talking to your employees. Because frankly, the reason the subtitle of my book is Drive Change That Your Employees Can See and Feel, which actually are words that you previously used, is that employees already know. So if things aren't good, the only person that you're fooling yourself is yourself, if in the leadership team. Because employees already know. They just may not be telling you. I once worked for a company that had acquired another company I think it actually was in Detroit. And one day I was walking past the mailroom of the bigger company that was acquiring the smaller company, and the people in the mailroom were just laughing. They were just having a wonderful time, and I knew everybody. I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And they said, "Oh, we're just laughing at some of the stupid things that these people are doing." Who's these people? Well, every day we're sending packages. We're sending like 50 FedEx packages up to Detroit, and folks in Detroit are sending 50 FedEx packages down. Each package might have one letter in it that somebody had to sign as part of this due diligence process or whatever. Mm-hmm. Simple little small documents. And it never occurred to anybody in this company that maybe they could just do 2 things a day, 2 batches a day. Mm-hmm. We could do 4 shipments. We could send, whatever, and we could just make it more efficient, costless, and so on. They said, well, have you told anybody? Why don't you suggest it? I'm never going to suggest it, because nobody listens to us. We're not important here. So we're just going to laugh about it. We're never going to tell anybody how they could do this better. This is a story. This is something I literally experienced 20 something years ago. I've never forgotten it, because it's the essence of what you're talking about when you say, what is the difference between the performance and the innovation and the creativity and the problem solving that you get from people who are engaged and feel respected versus those who do not? They might still do the job, but they'll do the minimum, and they won't give you the incremental value from all the new ideas that they could bring.
I always give the example of grazing gazelles in the savannah. The gazelles at the center of the herd graze at 100%. They're heading down, their ears are down, they're grazing, they're being productive in their consumption of grass. Yeah. Right? They feel safe. They feel safe because there's, layers of flesh between me and a very hungry lion on the other side, right? Where the gazelles on the outside are always kind of eating, looking up, mm-hmm. eating. Oh, there's an ear up, eating. Oh, so they're not performing their job, which is eating mm-hmm. grass at 100% because they don't feel safe.
That's right.
Why, for something that is such behavioral and ancestral, just make people feel safe so that they can be, and if they're safe, then they can be creative. They can be productive. They'll go above and beyond because they know somebody's got your back. And I wanted to come back to that. Frontline supervision is the 100% where you should invest all of your dollars to make sure that your frontline supervisors are the kindest human beings in the world. Right. And often at times we tend to hire technicians as frontline supervisors. And we go, oh, hold on a second. You're great. Loved my experience with Tyson Foods. I worked with Tyson Foods for a long time. And, people would process chicken and go, hey, you're going to go be a supervisor. But the best supervisors were somebody that came up from a different department that didn't know what the job was, but just so kind to people because I go, I don't know the job. Let me be kind to you because you need 100% my attention to be the best performing individual as possible. Yes, right. So that circle of safety is critical for innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I, as I said, I always say that supervisors should remember that they have like a dartboard in the middle of their foreheads. That is to say, if you lead a team of 14 people, every one of those 14 people can tell me, do you prefer to wear black socks or brown socks? Do you wear gold jewelry or silver jewelry? Do you drive? Are you more of an Android person, or are you more of a? Because people, they're paying that much attention to everything you do. So if you have 14 people paying so much close attention to everything that you're doing, and you're only attending to 10 of those 14 people, you can be sure that they know that. Everybody knows it, actually. All 14 of them know that. And you're missing something, and you're not realizing that the whole world can see this. Why would you want to be that sort of a fractional leader? You really don't, and you're not being successful. And I also think that when, in a situation like that, let's assume then that you're thinking about the herd that you're talking about, the gazelles. Those folks, as you're saying, that are on the fringes, that don't feel like they're on the inside, like they're in the inner circle, they'll do what is necessary. But the first chance that they get, they're either going to leave. They're certainly not going to, go above and beyond. Why would you want that? I mean, why would you want that for yourself or for your organization? You really don't. You just haven't given it enough consideration. And so I agree. First, frontline leaders have got to be really the ones that are the strongest. But I think they need to be strong and human.
Of course, yes.
Is human. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, strength. What I meant by strength is like a strong leader that is compassionate, empathetic.
No, we're agreeing. We're agreeing.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's it.
I see strength as courageous and vulnerability. Absolutely. Like what's her name, Mrs. Brene Brown on courage and vulnerability. Correct. A few more questions. What is the positive signs? What is it that brings you joy when we talk about, because we've been bashing a lot, and rightfully so. There needs to be, to make a good cake, you got to break some eggs, and I think it's important. What are the positive trends? What are you seeing that you're pleased with that leaders are doing?
Oh, I'm actually pleased with quite a bit. First of all, if we're just talking about this overall idea of leadership, right, just leadership as a whole, the pandemic has wrought great benefits. That's not to say things are perfect. But for my 20-something years of being an industrial psychologist, I have what we gripe about, IO psychologists, when we get together, is that leaders don't appear to be paying attention to what we've been showing them in the research for decades and decades. That's what we would gripe about. But what happened as a result of the pandemic is that people realized out of necessity that they had to really focus on the human experience if they were going to have somebody to do this job, if they were going to have somebody to promote, if they were going to, so whatever. So that has been a benefit that came directly from the pandemic. I'm still seeing positive, a trailing effect of it. And it is a good thing. It has benefited everyone. So let's say that is true. And that is true. And I am seeing that. I think that for people who might have been traditionally disadvantaged, or people who might have physical or neurological disabilities, or any of the other characteristics that we in our country would say, okay, maybe it's not a typical thing. I do think there's a new conversation that started in the spring of 2020. So I only start my counter for 2 years. I'm not going back centuries. I'm starting with the spring of 2020, because I know that when I talk to people, the conversations I'm having are different. I am, you can tell from my style that I'm the kind of person, I'm not trying to judge anyone. I'm not trying, my goal in life is not to criticize people. My goal in life is to have the kind of, offer some ideas that maybe someone will say, I hadn't thought of it that way before. And then we have a nice little conversation, and they leave and they do something a little bit differently than they did it before. I have my goals, those are my goals. And I've had a ton of those conversations with people where I might have been least likely to have been in their presence, never mind have that conversation. So I feel we're talking about the human experience in different ways as well. And we're specifically a little more attuned to the reality that, you know what, life is kind of short. And we might as well try to focus on, I'm seeing a lot more of behaviors that I say, give people some grace in the short term and in the long term. And then I'll mention one more thing that I'm seeing that I absolutely think is a positive. And it actually has to do with this whole notion of climate change and the fact that, you know, we are little specks on this planet. The notion that, you know what, we're kind of in this together. We're either going to succeed in the things that we care about if we try to do them together versus if we do something different. I'm not saying that, you know, everything is perfect, because obviously that's not the case. But I think people are having to sort of stop and think for a minute about that and say, well, what do we want for our children? I'm using the climate as the best example because, you know, it's something that we, you know, whether we agree or disagree as to how dire things are, we can all agree that if we can't live, we can't have any of the other benefits that we want to have. I just love that I'm hearing people having more conversations about what can we do better. I'm hearing many more of those kinds of conversations.
Just through our investors, we deal with a lot of investors, and investors, instead of looking at high yield now, they're looking at, okay, what's the company that has impact? Which the ones that company, the word that I love is prosperity, means that we repeat hard work should be celebrated. Sometimes, like my book, Embrace the Ox, you have to plow the field, and plowing the field is not easy. So you plow the field, you sow the seeds. Sometimes hard work is needed, but in a way that, but you're not plowing, you know, 250,000 acres of just wheat. Be knowledgeable, be sensible, be prosperous in your mindset, because you want to repeat the cycle, not just for your lifetime, but for other lifetimes. So people or investors are putting money in more of impact areas. We focus on trades and manufacturing. So we use, you know, manufacturing components that reduce waste, that improve the use of different materials in the trade sides as well. Treated people, you know, in North America, there's this awful stigma with trades. Don't be one of those, right? Everybody thinks that they need to have an education. My kids, I got 4 kids. My 2 kids, my first ones have gone through trade school. My second daughter, she's 20. She's an auto mechanic looking to become a diesel mechanic. And she's like, Dad, I'm happy. I enjoy working with trucks. I like getting my hands dirty. And so the point of this is inclusivity. Inclusion means, for me, like, how do you bring people to not just cooperate, but collaborate in a way that is beneficial to others, right? Inclusion, the one thing that I'd like to say finally as well is, think of your top performers. Often as leaders, we give 100% attention to the people who are not performing, and we tend to not include, you know, do I see you? Do I hear you? Do you matter to me? The top performers, they're good. They're fine. But then that inclusivity needs to be addressed in that as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned the trades because you might have heard, or you certainly know that there is a change in the conversation where leaders are beginning to focus more on skills and less on degrees and education as the primary criterion that they're going to use for making selection decisions. That is a sea change that we needed to have for a long time, because it's really bizarre to think that only this small number of people who managed to go to that school could possibly be the ones that can run this company or whatever else, right? I love seeing this whole maker movement that has, I think this trend started like 15 years ago, where people talk, when I hear words like artisan, where people are saying, I want to make something with my hands. And the reason is that, first of all, I know how to do this well. I'm a crafts person. And when I create this thing, it's tangible and it's going to last, and it's going to have a utilitarian value. They're going to use it. The wood is going to get smoother. The leather is going to get softer and more. Like those are simple ideas that I'm hearing, that I have been hearing more of in the last 10 years or so than I heard before. And I love it because when we really believe that we were put on the planet to do a certain thing, we do it well, and we have that pride in it. It
Hmm.
can't just be that the only people that get to feel that way or that are valued for feeling that way are the investment bankers or the
Oh,
lawyers or the
I
doctors.
agree. I agree. I mean, I refer to Japanese culture, bow making, sword making. I refer to France. You go to France, and so baking is always split into two, like baking bread and stuff, the savory stuff. And you have the baker, the pâtissier,
Yeah.
who are the sweet side.
Yeah.
And you go to France, and you'll go to a boulangerie, a baking shop that they make bread, and goes,
Yeah.
I am a baker. My father was a baker, and my grandfather was a baker, and they take pride in it. And I think we've
Yes.
lost a lot of that. And I
Yes.
mean, it comes through pioneering as well, because when the West was conquered, you had to be good at everything. You had to build a church, you had to build your
Yes.
house, you had to farm.
Yes.
So we tended to kind of forget that. To your point, I think um, in the trade of being a leader, if you are going to say, "Hey, listen, I'm a leader," and that's what we decided when Urgio was evolving. We wanted to have that trades feeling. We said no to SaaS. We said no to services. We want to be able to provide that opportunity to others. And company tends to or owners and founders tend to think that, oh, I have to retire. I have to sell my company to be philanthropic. And what is philanthropic for you? Like, oh, I want to serve the underserved. Well, why don't you do it now? Why don't you hire people that are not there? Why don't you help become better leaders? How do you push somebody out of your organization because you know they're too good for you? Why are you not including all of that conversation and waiting for you to have millions of dollars in your pocket before being a kind person? Selfish. But I say selfish. It's not identified because it has not been programmed, because that's the definition of success that we
That's right.
have.
You're
Um,
absolutely right.
Gina, final question, because I think we go for hours and hours on this. Your book is awesome. Two questions, actually. Which one is your best chapter in the book? The one that you love the most? Hard
Mhm.
question.
Yeah, there's a chapter. It's actually a chapter about a difficult subject. It's really about sort of our segregation history in the United States. But the part of the chapter that includes a story where I talk about living on a street in Tampa Bay and um, never having had contact with a neighbor, and then one day I just said, I'm going to build up my courage. I'm going to talk to this person because I don't understand a flag that they have in their yard. And I'm
Oh no.
concerned they might not understand the flag I have in mine. And I screwed up my courage and I talked to this person and they explained to me why they had this flag. And I was like, oh, well, that makes complete sense. And we talked. And now when this person drives by my street right here, if we see each other, we wave. I had never waved at this person before. I had my preconceived notions about this person. I'm sure they might have had preconceived notions about me. But the reason I like that part of my chapter is because it's the part about the hope that comes when we just see it goes back to these same ideas. We just see each other, right? We
Mhm.
just see each other. We just touch each other. Somehow we find a way to just break through all the nonsense and communicate. And it is so very powerful. And the emotional tail that carries is so incredibly long that in this moment, if I needed something, I know I can go knock on that person's door. Whereas a minute before I had that conversation with him, I didn't even want to look in his yard. So it's just, we got to find ways to connect with one another. And while that can sometimes sound very simplistic, it's one part of that chapter in a whole book that I am hoping leaves people with that same sense of optimism about what they can do.
Fear is such a debilitating emotion, isn't
Mhm.
it?
It
We're
is.
afraid. Oh, what is that person going to say? And then we shoot ourselves down in so many
That's
different
right.
ways. Oh, Gina, what, at the exception of your book, what is the book of reference for you? Which book, article, movie have has resonated with you for the longest that you keep referring back to?
Well, in terms of, it may not have resonated for the longest because this is a book that has only been out for a couple of years.
Mhm.
But when I read a book called The Warmth of Other Suns um, by Wilkerson, and she has also written Caste, Isabel Wilkerson. That was her second book. I didn't grow up in this country, and so even though I talk about what people call diversity and inclusion in this book, one of the weird things is that there are so many things about American life that aren't in my pores. Even though I've lived here a fairly long time, like my parents and my grandparents, it's not in their pores. So there's still some things I don't understand. And so when I read these two books, I really came to understand a lot about, for example, one of my favorite cities in this country, Chicago, from a particular experience of people who have migrated from the South to that part of the country. But but these two books help me understand the American experience for people who look like me on the outside, in a way that I could only have known had I grown up here, but of course I didn't. So I love those two books, and I recommend them to a lot of people.
Thank you for that. When I started working with Tyson in Carthage, Mississippi, shout out to all my Carthage, Mississippi folks in Tyson. We started talking and I said, hey, here's what we're doing. Operational excellence. We're going to move the needle, right? And sometimes, you have to be kind and stuff like that. But sometimes you just have to crack the whip in the air to get everybody's attention. And Floyd Womack, a linesman for the Seattle Seahawks for the longest time, mountain of a man. Him and I got along great. And he's did you just say crack the whip in a room full of black people in the South? And I go, yeah, why? He goes, think about it. I was like, oh shit. Because I didn't grow up with that stuff, right? It's for me, where I grew up, it's like, it's in Hell's Kitchen. There's different races, religions, everything. So I just thought about it and I go, Lord Almighty, I was super apologetic. And through my mistake, I learned what it was, or the emotions that people felt. Carthage, Mississippi is maybe 40 miles away from where Mississippi burning happened. And you feel the emotion. Before I made that mistake as a leader, and accepted my mistake and say, repent on my mistake and ask for forgiveness. Without that outward courage of accepting it, I would have not understood. I mean, I can't understand because I'm not, but I did my best to absorb the feeling of what it felt like and how it was so prevalent. So no, thank you for that. That's, they were very inclusive. I love in the South. Mississippi is just a beautiful place to be. With that being said, Gena, thank you very, very much for being on the show. Where can we find your book?
You can certainly find it on Amazon. My book is called Leading Inclusion, 2 words, on Amazon. And my name is Gena with an E, Gena Cox. But you can also go to my website, which is also my name, GenaCox.com, and click on the tab book. And you'll find a lot of information about me, the book, and the things that I like to do when I'm not talking to Martin.
You're on LinkedIn as well?
I am. And with my name, Gena Cox.
We will be putting all of Gena's information in regards to the book in the tabs on what CEOs talk about. So just go to the website, click that link. That will point you to all of Gena's information. So fabulous for that. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Fabulous. With that being said, my name is Martin Hunter. I'm the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate vision into frontline operations. Please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.